They said I deserved a vacation, but when I woke up in Hawaii, they were gone. They said I deserved a vacation. Their exact words, if I remember them right, were, "After everything you've done for us, Mom, you should get a little sun, too." And that's how I ended up in Hawaii for the first time in my 74 years. Not for my honeymoon, not after Harold passed, not even after I retired. Just now, flown in on points I didn't pay for staying in a room I didn't book with people who didn't really want me there. But I didn't know that at first. At first I was touched. Maybe a little suspicious because I've lived long enough to know when something looks shinier than it should, but touched all the same. Andrew said it was his way of giving back. Kylie said I needed a change of scenery. The twins, Emily and Ben, didn't say much, just shrugged and scrolled through their phones when I asked if we'd get to visit a botanical garden. I told myself not to overthink it. I packed light. 1 suitcase, 3 linen dresses, my arthritis cream, a bottle of rose lotion that smelled like memory. I even got a new pair of sandals for the trip. Sensible ones with Velcro straps and arch support. When we landed in Maui, Andrew rented a black SUV. Said he needed the space for gear, though I never did see any. We checked into a resort that smelled like coconut and money. They had those cold towels at reception, the kind with lemon and mint folded in. The receptionist gave me a shell necklace and said, "Aloha, Grandma," like she meant it. For a brief moment, I felt welcome. The room they gave me was spacious, tucked away from the main suite. More like a private annex than a true part of the family lodging. I didn't question it. Kylie said I'd appreciate a little quiet, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. I did appreciate quiet. Just not that kind. We had 2 days of family excursions, beach walks, poolside drinks, a sunset dinner cruise where no one really spoke to me, but everyone took a group photo that I wasn't in. They said I was napping. I wasn't. I remember looking out from the balcony that night, watching the dark slide over the waves like a silk sheet. I remember feeling something I couldn't name, yet a shift of distance, like the warmth had started to go stale. Then came the 3rd night. Andrew mentioned a dinner party. A late thing he said, hosted by someone he met at the pool bar. "Nothing for you to worry about, Mom." He smiled. "We'll probably be back late. You should rest." It's been a big day. Kylie handed me a key card, said room service is open all night if you need tea. Emily added a quick, "Good night, Grandma," without looking up from her phone. Ben just grunted. I kissed them all on the cheek like always. Told them to have fun. And I meant it. I climbed the short path back to my room, slow, careful, my knees singing that old tune they've hummed since I turned 60. The night air smelled of hibiscus and sunscreen. I opened the balcony door to let in the breeze. I watched the stars come out and thought about Harold, how he used to say Hawaii was on his list, but too far for a man with flat feet. I smiled to myself. I even poured a small glass of wine, and I went to bed. Happy not quite, but hopeful. I woke just after 6. I always do. Old women don't need alarm clocks, just the persistent ache of hips and hearts. The room was silent. I washed my face, brushed my hair, slipped into the blue dress with shell buttons. Then I stepped outside. The suite was dark, empty. No shoes by the door, no wet swimsuits on the railing, no voices, no rustling, no mess. I checked the kitchen. No coffee brewing, no half-eaten cereal bowls left on the counter like usual. Nothing. I walked to the front desk. The concierge smiled, Called me Mrs. Delaney. Asked if I was checking out too. I asked what he meant. He said the guests in the main suite had checked out early. Around 5 a.m., he thought. Said something about a flight change. Private car. No bags left behind. My stomach dropped without making a sound. I went back to my room, looked for a note, a text, anything, nothing. I tried calling Andrew. Straight to voicemail. Tried Kylie. Disconnected. Tried Emily and Ben. No response. I sent a message to our neighbor Janice back home. Have you seen Andrew? Just checking in. She read it. Didn't reply. And in that silence, I understood. I wasn't lost. I wasn't forgotten. I had been quietly, efficiently removed. Like rearranging furniture. Like retiring a coat that no longer fits the weather. I didn't call again. Not out of pride. Not even out of anger. But because the silence told me everything I needed to know. Whatever I was going to hear if I heard anything at all wouldn't change what had already happened. And so I sat. On that little balcony with my cup of lukewarm resort coffee and the last of the macadamia shortbread I'd stashed in my bag. I watched the ocean stretch wide and disinterested before me. And I let the stillness do what it needed to. For a long time, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd hovered too much. Maybe I talked too long about Harold. Maybe I asked too many times if they were okay. But then slowly, another thought arrived. Not loud, just present. Maybe I wasn't the problem. Maybe I was simply inconvenient, not dramatic enough to argue with, not helpless enough to rally around. Just inconvenient. Too slow for their pace. Too old for their version of what fits. They hadn't left me with cruelty. They'd left me with logistics. The room was still paid for 2 more nights. There was still a breakfast credit on the room card. My passport was still tucked in the drawer. And my return flight, the original one we'd all booked together, was canceled, I later discovered. Rebooked under their names. One way, without me. No trace of malice, just erasure. I took the elevator down and walked to the beach. The sand was already warm. Children built castles like nothing had ever been broken. I found a quiet bench under a palm tree and sat there for hours. I thought about the last Christmas I'd hosted. The pot roast Andrew said was a little dry. The gift I gave Kylie, a hand-knit shawl she never wore. The way Ben rolled his eyes when I asked if he still played piano. I thought about Harold, too. How he used to tuck $20 bills into books on my nightstand just in case. How we always had a coffee can in the pantry marked emergencies only, which he joked should be renamed Margaret's exit plan. I smiled at that, because as it turns out I'd made one. Not the coffee can, not exactly, but something like it. 10 years ago, after Harold passed, I opened a separate account. Nothing massive, but steady. Every month I tucked away what little I could. Birthday money, tax returns, even a scratch-off win, once $300. I never told Andrew. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed one thing in this life that was only mine. I thought maybe I'd use it for a final trip, or a long-term care facility of my choosing, if it came to that. Maybe even a small cabin by the coast where I could sit with tea and remember who I used to be, but I never imagined I'd need it. Like this. I walked to the nearest cafe that had Wi-Fi, ordered a cup of tea, sat by the window, and I pulled out my notebook, the one I kept for recipes. Poems I never finished and quotes I liked from magazines. I turned to a blank page, wrote a single sentence. They've already left, but I haven't. That night I didn't cry. I packed slowly, carefully. I looked around the hotel room like someone saying goodbye to a version of herself she didn't need to take along. I kept the robe. Not because it was soft, it wasn't, but because it reminded me that I had been here, that I wasn't a dream they'd dreamt and erased. I was real, present, still deciding. At the airport the next morning, I booked a flight. Not home, but to a small town on the Oregon coast where Harold and I once spent our anniversary. A foggy, sleepy place with too many seagulls and a bookstore that sold honey in the back. I didn't tell anyone. I paid cash. I carried only my bag. And in my pocket, folded 4 times, was the balance receipt from the account I had opened a decade ago. Still enough. Still mine. As I boarded the plane, a flight attendant asked, "Traveling alone today, ma'am?" And I answered, "Not alone. Just finally with myself." That was the day I stopped waiting to be retrieved. Stopped checking the phone. Stopped imagining explanations. Because I knew, and now I had a choice. Not of what they did, but of what I would do next. They left without goodbye. So I began again without permission. They left without goodbye. So I began again without asking. The air in Oregon tasted different. Colder, wetter, but clean like something had been scrubbed away. When the plane landed, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Not peace, not yet, but calm enough to carry myself forward without trembling. I stepped off the jet bridge with no one waiting on the other side. No signs with my name, no eager faces, no hands to pull my suitcase. And for once I was grateful for the emptiness. The cab driver was kind, quiet. Didn't ask questions when I said, "Somewhere near the water, but not too expensive." He dropped me at a small inn just off the highway, the kind that still used real keys and had Gideon Bibles in the drawers. The woman at the front desk was older than me, hair up in a messy gray bun smile like she'd seen everything and judged none of it. "You here for the storms or the stillness?" she asked. I blinked. "Bit of both," I said. She handed me the key without another word. The room had no view, but the walls were thick and the silence inside was soft. There was a cross above the bed, wooden, plain, unshiny. I'm not what you'd call devout, but I talk to God sometimes, quietly, not to ask for miracles, just to say I'm still here. Are you? That night I did just that. I sat at the little desk by the window and whispered into the dark, "Lord, I don't need them to come back. I just need strength to not look over my shoulder." And I felt not an answer, but a steadiness, a kind of weight in my chest that said, "You are seen, even when the ones you love stop seeing you." In the morning, I walked. The streets were damp, lined with mossy sidewalks and coffee shops that smelled like real beans, not powder. People nodded as they passed, not nosy, just neighborly. I liked that. I found a bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a bait shop. It hadn't changed since Harold and I visited, still creaky floorboards, still handwritten signs, still the same old man behind the counter who looked like he'd been carved from driftwood. He didn't recognize me. I didn't expect him to. But when I bought a second-hand copy of Willa Cather's My Antonia, he smiled and said, "You have good taste. Only people who've been through something pick that one." I smiled back. Then I must have excellent taste. Later that day, I inquired about long-term rentals. Nothing fancy, just a place with a door I could lock and a kitchen that worked. The second listing I saw was perfect. A one-bedroom cottage above a florist's shop. Hardwood floors, peeling paint, a tiny porch with room for one rocking chair. I said yes before the tour even ended. When I signed the rental agreement, the landlord, a woman named Joni with chipped nail polish and a husky laugh, looked at me and said, "You starting over?" I nodded. She didn't press, just handed me the keys. The next morning, I moved in. No fanfare. Just me, a rolling suitcase, and the box of photos I'd shipped to myself from the hotel in Hawaii. A week had passed since they left me. Not a call, not a word. At first I checked. Then I stopped. Instead, I started buying hangers, a toaster, a kettle. Little things that whispered, "You're allowed to belong again." And every night I boiled water for tea, opened my Antonia, and placed the cross from the motel on the windowsill. Not because I needed a symbol, but because I needed a reminder that faith doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just sits beside you, steady and small, and says, "Keep going." I didn't rebuild my life with thunder. I rebuilt it with tea kettles and clean sheets. The days settled into a rhythm. Morning walks to the bakery 2 blocks down, where the girl at the counter learned my name by the third visit and started slipping me the corner croissants, always a little too golden to sell. Afternoons in the tiny living room sun, patching the rug like a blessing through the thin lace curtains. Evenings with books, old movies, and the quiet that no longer frightened me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I started keeping a list in the back of my notebook, the same one I'd carried from Hawaii. A new kind of list. Not groceries, not bills, but small proofs of life. Day 4. I hung my first picture. Harold's smile still reaches the corners. Day 7. The tea kettle whistles just before I doze off. A soft alarm that says, "Still here." Day 11. The neighbor waved, not out of habit, but warmth. Day 15. I sang while folding laundry. Only 2 lines, but they belonged to me. Some days I heard children laughing from the flower shop downstairs. Joni's granddaughter, I later learned. Her name was Evie, 6 years old with a missing front tooth and a curiosity too big for her sandals. She showed up at my door one morning holding a slightly squished bouquet. "My grandma says you're nice," she said. I opened the door a little wider. "I try to be," I answered. She handed me the flowers, then ran off before I could ask anything else. I put them in a jar and let them lean like they didn't care about arrangement. That was the beginning. On Sundays, I walked to a small church tucked behind the grocery store. No grand bells, no robes, just wooden pews, worn Bibles, and a pastor who spoke like he was reading to a friend. The first week, I sat in the back. No one noticed me, which was exactly what I needed. But the third Sunday, a woman named June turned around after the final hymn and said, "I like your scarf. Reminds me of my mother's." We talked about fabric for 15 minutes, and then she asked, not out of pity, but something closer to kindness. "Would you like to come with me next week? I always stop for pie after service." I hesitated, then said yes, because that too felt like a quiet decision. Some nights I still thought of Andrew, of Kylie, of the twins. I wondered if they missed me if they told a story to others that made it easier to sleep. She needed space. She didn't want to come back. She's fine. I wondered if they'd even noticed what they'd taken, not just my presence, but the certainty that someone would always wait. And then I stopped wondering. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I started loving something else more my own time. The sound of the waves against the bluff 2 streets down, the way the bookstore smelled when it rained, the feel of warm socks straight from the dryer, the silence that asked nothing of me but to be honest. One afternoon, I walked into a small antique shop. I wasn't looking for anything, just wandering. But on the back shelf underneath a faded map of Oregon, I saw it, a wooden jewelry box. Hand-carved, worn at the edges. Identical to the one I thought was lost forever. Harold had given it to me for our 25th anniversary. Andrew took it by accident during the house clean-out last year. Said they'd keep it safe with the other mementos. I'd asked about it twice after. They'd said it was probably packed somewhere, but here it was, in a shop 2 states away, unlabeled, forgotten, $12 on a sticker. I bought it, not to prove a point, just to have one piece of memory returned to me by grace, not by demand. I opened it at home. It still smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. Inside was a note I'd once written. Harold, if you go first, I'll carry the quiet. If I go first, wait for me by the sea. I wept, but not from grief, from clarity. I wasn't here to reclaim what they took. I was here to remember what they couldn't. My life wasn't erased. It was simply misplaced. And now, day by day, I was retrieving it. One note, one kettle, one decision at a time. You don't need an audience to reclaim your life, just a spine, a plan, and the willingness to let go. It started with a phone call. I didn't answer. Andrew's name lit up on the screen one afternoon just as I was steeping chamomile. It rang 3 times, then stopped. No voicemail. I stood still, holding the cup, waiting to feel something. Anger, relief, maybe hope. But all I felt was stillness. He didn't call again. And I didn't call back. Because by then I'd begun to understand there's power in not responding to the people who only reach for you when they fear they've lost control, not connection. I spent that week going through old papers, not out of bitterness, but because I finally had time to ask, what do I actually want done with the life I've built? There were drawers of documents I hadn't touched since Harold passed. Trusts, insurance, bonds, a safety deposit box key I hadn't seen in years. Most of it had names written on it. Names I no longer trusted with that kind of access. Andrew was still listed as my primary financial agent. Kylie had co-signing authority on one account. The twins were named beneficiaries on a mutual fund I hadn't reviewed since Ben still played with Legos. I sat at my little kitchen table surrounded by folders and yellowing envelopes and made a quiet decision. If they could walk away from me without a word, then I had the right to walk away from the idea that I owed them anything. The next morning, I made 3 appointments. An attorney recommended by Joni Sharp as a tack, kind as a winter blanket. A local bank where I could transfer my funds and lock down access. A notary at the library who worked Tuesdays for free. I brought my papers in a canvas tote bag and explained what I wanted. New power of attorney. New executor. New beneficiaries. The lawyer asked, "Do you want to leave anything to your family?" I paused, then said only to the ones who stayed without asking. He nodded like he'd heard that before. and maybe he had. That same week, I mailed a package to Mary, my goddaughter in Wisconsin. We hadn't spoken often in the past decade, but she was the only one who ever sent me a handwritten card on my birthday. Inside the envelope, I included a letter. This isn't a reward. It's recognition. For kindness that didn't ask for anything back. I hope someday you do something wonderful with it for someone else. She didn't reply right away. But when she did, it was a voicemail. With tears in her voice and a single sentence I've never forgotten. You've reminded me what love without strings feels like. I also canceled the college fund Andrew had insisted I open for the twins, the one I'd been contributing to every December, instead of buying myself a new winter coat. There was still a good chunk left. Instead of letting it sit, I transferred the balance to a new community scholarship for local kids who were the first in their family to attend college. No plaque, no publicity. Just a handwritten note taped to the application form. For someone who's never been told they're allowed to matter. And somehow that felt more like family than anything I'd done in years. I didn't tell anyone. Not because it was a secret, but because dignity doesn't need an announcement. What they'd tried to take wasn't money or control. It was narrative. They wanted to decide who I was, what I was worth, how far my reach extended. And now, by changing the paperwork, I changed the story. Not for revenge, but for truth. There is a kind of forgiveness that doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to carry the weight of what they refused to hold. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old postcard. It was from Harold, written years before he passed during a fishing trip he took with his brother in Montana. The front showed a faded lake with pine trees. On the back, his handwriting still strong and steady. Miss you more than I miss hot coffee. I hope the house still smells like you. H. I pressed the card to my chest, and for a moment, I let the grief rise. Not sharp, not new, just a soft, familiar ache. That night, I lit a candle for him. Not because he needed the light, but because I did. I started keeping Sunday dinners just for me. I'd set the table with a cloth. Make something slow and warm stew, roasted vegetables, cornbread. I even folded a napkin. Just one, not because I was pretending someone else would join, but because I deserved the kind of care I used to give away without limit. That was part of the reclamation too. Not just the legal things, the bank accounts, the documents, the wills, but the emotional inheritance, learning to belong to myself again, to eat with ceremony, to speak with kindness to the woman in the mirror, to no longer feel guilty for enjoying an afternoon without anyone else's name on it. One rainy Thursday, Evie came up the back stairs holding a drawing. It was of me, rocking on my porch chair with the sea behind me and flowers blooming out of the chimney. "This is where you live forever," she said simply. I nearly cried. "I think you see me better than most people do," I told her. She nodded. "You're the quiet kind of magic." I pinned the drawing on my wall next to Harold's postcard. 2 reminders, one of who I had been loved by, and one of who saw me still. Then one evening, my phone buzzed. It was an email. From Andrew, subject, no subject. "Mom, I know we hurt you. I don't know how to explain what we did. I'm sorry. Kylie says I should have reached out sooner. I hope you're okay, Andrew." I stared at the screen for a long while. Not angry. Not moved to tears. Just still. He hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't offered anything either, no plan, no meeting, no actual responsibility. But it wasn't cruel. It was just unfinished. And that's what I left it as. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing him, but because I no longer needed to fill the silence he had chosen for us. I had stepped out of that space, and I wasn't going back. Forgiveness, I've come to believe, doesn't always mean opening the door. Sometimes it simply means not standing behind it, waiting. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about granting entry again. It's about not letting bitterness be the loudest voice in the room. Some nights, I still dream of the Hawaii trip. Not the part where they left, but the night before when we were all laughing at dinner, the air thick with tropical sweetness, and the illusion that nothing was broken. I don't hate them for that illusion, but I no longer believe in it either. Reclamation isn't about getting back what was taken. It's about recognizing what was always yours and choosing finally to keep it. My voice, my time, my name, not as someone's mother or grandmother, but simply as Margaret, the woman who cooked for herself, who changed her will, who rocked in her chair by the sea and let the salt air remind her that she was still here, still whole. Sometimes the person who comes back isn't the one who hurt you. It's the one who saw you bleeding and never looked away. It was early spring when I saw her again. I was in the small grocery store on Main Street, the one with wooden floors that creaked like old knees and a bell above the door that rang whether you were ready for it or not. I had just placed a bundle of asparagus in my basket when I heard someone say, "Grandma." I froze. No one in this town called me that. Slowly, I turned, and there she was, Lily, my oldest granddaughter. Same dark curls tucked behind one ear. Same eyes too big for her face, and always searching. Only now, they looked older, tired, but softer somehow. She took one hesitant step toward me. "I wasn't sure it was really you," she said. "But then I saw the scarf. You always wore that scarf in the spring." I glanced down. It was the pale yellow one Harold bought me in 1982 from a shop in Carmel. I hadn't worn it in years, but something about the sea air here had asked for it. "I didn't think you'd want to see any of us," she added, voice quiet. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "That depends," I said. "Are you here for them or for you?" Her mouth trembled just a little. "For me," she whispered. We sat on the bench outside the store, 2 paper bags between us. Mine had tea and eggs. Hers had oranges and toothpaste. The air smelled like salt and lemons. "I didn't know how to reach you," she said, twisting the edge of her sleeve. "Dad wouldn't say anything except that you were off somewhere taking a break." I nodded. "That sounds like him." She hesitated. I didn't know they left you in Hawaii." "Not like that." "I thought you flew back separately, that it was your choice." I looked at her then. "Lily," I said gently, "it's not your job to make excuses for the things adults pretend not to see." Her eyes welled up. She blinked fast. "I knew something was wrong that night," she said. "You looked smaller, like you were folding inward." I swallowed, and yet I murmured. No one said a word. "I was scared," she admitted. "It wasn't until weeks later that I realized you were gone for real. And when I asked, Dad told me not to stir up drama." I gave a small, rueful smile. He always did mistake silence for peace. She pulled something from her coat pocket, a small envelope. "I wrote to you, but I didn't know where to send it." She handed it to me. I opened it there beside the oranges and toothpaste. Inside was a card hand drawn, a sketch of hibiscus flowers, bright, precise, trembling with care. Inside, 4 words in her looping script: "You deserved better." Always. My throat tightened. She didn't apologize for them. She didn't ask for forgiveness she didn't need. She just showed up, fully, as herself. Not all healing comes from confrontation. Sometimes it walks up to you in a grocery store carrying oranges and sits quietly beside your grief. You don't need everyone to come back. Sometimes one person is enough. "Would you like to come by for tea?" I asked. Lily's eyes widened a little, then softened. "I'd love that." We walked the few blocks back to the cottage, slow and quiet. I told her about the jasmine bush that bloomed too early, the way the sea mist curled under the porch, how the wind here sounded more like a whisper than a warning. She listened with both ears, like Harold used to. Inside, I boiled water and took out 2 cups, the good ones with the blue rim. I'd been saving them for what I didn't know. But that day, it felt right. She wandered around the small living room, stopping at the mantel. "You kept this," she said. Lifting the drawing, Evie made the one of me in my rocking chair with flowers blooming from the chimney. I smiled. "It's truer than any photograph." She looked at me. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I poured the tea, sat across from her, and considered that question. "I used to," I said. "But I've come to believe some losses are necessary." She frowned. "Not because we deserve them, but because without them, we'd keep waiting for people who never intended to meet us halfway." Lily sat back, hands around her cup. "I always wanted to ask you something," she said. "Back in Hawaii, that night they all went out. Why did you go back to the hotel early? Didn't you know they'd leave?" I shook my head. "No. I believed them when they said they'd be late, that I'd be more comfortable resting." She looked down. "I should have stayed with you." I reached over and touched her hand. "You were 16, and you're not the one who disappeared in the morning." Her eyes shimmered. Later, I opened the small wooden box I kept under the stairs. Inside a few photographs, Harold's pocket, watch the deed to the old lake cabin, and a letter I had rewritten last month, my will. I handed it to her. She looked confused. "I'm not here to ask for anything, Grandma." "I know," I said. "That's why it's you." She didn't open it right away, just held it like it weighed more than paper. "I don't want to be the reason they come back," she whispered. "You won't be," I said gently. "I've made sure of that." That afternoon, we walked the shoreline behind the house, shoes off, wind soft. She told me about college, about how she switched majors twice and finally chose art therapy. I told her about the bird that knocks on my window every morning like it has somewhere to be. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a reunion with tears and violins. It was better. It was real. When she left, she hugged me long and close. "You didn't have to forgive me," she said against my shoulder. I pulled back. "I didn't," I replied, "because you never left." She nodded and walked down the path with light in her step. I watched her go. Not out of fear this time, but with a quiet, steady hope that maybe, just maybe, this is how things begin again, not with noise, but with gentleness. Not everything we leave behind is meant for blood. Some things, the best things, are for those who stayed. Let me ask you something. Have you ever given someone your whole heart quietly, consistently, year after year, and then one day realized They were never really holding it. Not in their hands. Not with care. Not even with interest. Just letting it beat there in the background while they went about their lives. I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because I lived it. And I think if you've made it this far with me, maybe you have too. After Lily left that afternoon, I sat alone in the stillness. The light was golden and low, the kind that made everything feel soft-edged. And I thought not about revenge or what should have been, but about what I wanted to pass on. Not money, not property. That part had already been handled. The account sealed the papers, notarized the names rewritten where they needed to be. I mean the real inheritance. The things no court could dictate, no bloodline could claim, no apology could earn. I took out a blank notebook and wrote 4 names at the top. Harold, Evie, Lily, me. Then I drew a line underneath and wrote, the people who saw me as a whole person. Not a utility, not an obligation, not an accessory to someone else's story. And I smiled. It wasn't a long list, but it was enough. Here's something I've learned, and I want you to hear this, especially if you're older and wondering if it's too late. You are not wrong for wanting to be seen. You are not selfish for protecting what's left of your peace. You do not owe anyone continued access to your spirit just because they share your last name. You are allowed to say, this part of me is not yours anymore. The next day, I brought out the cedar box where I kept my few treasures. I took Harold's watch, it still worked after all these years, and I wrapped it in one of my scarves, the yellow one from Hawaii. I placed them in a small bag and wrote a note for Lily. Time is yours now, but not for anyone else. Use it the way I never quite learned to, with joy, not duty. Then I folded up the drawing Evie had made and tucked it inside as well. Someday she'd be old enough to understand what it meant to bloom, even when no one asked you to. And finally, I wrote a letter to myself. Not as a goodbye, but as a thank you, dear Margaret. You did not disappear. You simply walked in a different direction. One they never followed. You stopped waiting. You stopped bleeding for silence. You came home to yourself. That is your legacy. Me. The best legacies don't live in vaults. They live in the way you choose peace, even when no one's watching. A week later, Lily came by again. This time with Evie. She held my hand all the way down the garden path like she had done once in Maui when I was being led away unknowingly. But today, I walked ahead, and she followed. We picked lemons. We made cookies from scratch. And Evie painted my fingernails with the gentlest touch I'd ever known. That evening after they left, I sat on the porch as the sun lowered itself into the sea, and I thought, they didn't win. Not because I outsmarted them, not because I sued or screamed or demanded my name back, but because I built a life they couldn't undo. A quiet one, a steady one, a true one. And if you're sitting there right now in your kitchen, your porch, your silence, wondering if it's too late for you, let me tell you something. From the bottom of my long, weathered heart, it is never too late to stop handing yourself to people who never asked how you feel. Never too late to take your name off the list of who owes them comfort. Never too late to begin again gently, without explanation, and entirely on your own terms. Harold once told me, when we were young and poor and daring, one day someone will ask what you left behind. Make sure it's more than money. Make sure it's the map back to your own name. I think I've finally drawn that map, folded it in Lily's hands, tucked it behind Evie's laughter, etched it in the garden gate that only opens from the inside. And now, I hand it to you. If this story found you at the right time, if it reminded you of something you forgot to protect, or someone you forgot you could become, then don't let it end here. Share it with someone who still thinks they have to earn their place at the table. Leave a comment, tell us what you're reclaiming, and above all, keep speaking. Even if they stop listening, we still are. This is Eleanor Speaks, and your story matters.